I am Joe Pardavila, and you are listening to the Forbes Books Podcast, and I'm currently obsessed with learning more about how to scale a business. After speaking to hundreds of entrepreneurs over the past couple of years, I found out why and how they built a business, but during those conversations, many of those successful CEOs and owners had the same problems when it came to growing or scaling their business. So this week, I'm joined by the author of Scale for Success, Jan Cavelle. Jan is a UK-based serial entrepreneur with decades of experience running and scaling companies, and these days, she's on a mission to help the next generation of entrepreneurs succeed. Jan, welcome to the podcast.
Joe, thank you so much.
Well, Jan, I like to ask this of entrepreneurs randomly, and the question is, why entrepreneurship? I've never been an entrepreneur. It seems really, really hard. What was it that inspired you to be an entrepreneur? Was it in your blood? Was it around in your family? What is it about entrepreneurship?
It's interesting. I've reflected on that a lot, and I think it was a combination of factors, Joe. I partly blame my dad because he used to be addicted to just sort of John Wayne films and generally cowboys and Indians. And I think there's, entrepreneurs are almost a modern day cowboy, aren't they?
And it's funny that you said that, Jan, because now I'm old enough, and maybe you are too, Jan. I don't want to give you your age. When I was young, the word entrepreneur was almost like a joke. Like if someone said you're an entrepreneur, you would say, "Oh, are you unemployed?" And it's funny how now there's like this sort of like a canonization of entrepreneurs. So I get what you're saying. So that in a way, there are modern day cowboys, and your dad was like that as well.
My dad actually was a farmer, so he was, I guess self-employed, if you like, but still there was this, I grew up in an atmosphere which you didn't have a boss. So that was a good start as well. But yeah, I just hated the idea of working for other people like so many entrepreneurs, so you start off doing things to avoid that horrendous fate.
And I know the sort of like the entrepreneur's conundrum is, find a problem, fix a problem. That's in basic terms what entrepreneurship is all about. So when you decided to go feet first, head first, whichever feet you decide to go in first, what problem were you trying to fix for your first entrepreneurial venture?
My very first entrepreneurial venture, I think, was probably, I'm just trying to think which came first, but I dabbled in so many in the very early days. But I think the first proper one that I focused on was selling sandwiches around offices in London before anybody else did it. And I guess it's probably not allowed anymore either. But yeah, I'd sort of make them in the morning at home and whisk them around all the office buildings and take orders for the next day, go home and make some more.
Were you into culinary arts? Were you a chef? What made you think that you could make these sandwiches other than, I know how to make a sandwich?
Well, I grew up in a generation where girls were expected to cook. And so I dabbled with cooking jobs and cooking things. I did actually, I don't know if it came first or afterwards, but this is how random my career was at the beginning. I met somebody in a pub who claimed they were a chef. And so we got into a discussion and said, let's start a cooking business. And so I went and got an order, and we had a dinner party on, and it was our first order, really exciting. And they wanted lobster thermidor. And I thought, great, I got lobsters. My newfound partner came round, and I said, here they are. And he went, I've never seen a lobster before. I don't know what to do. So I ended up having to dive into a cookery book and look up on earth to do these damn lobsters for the client. So that was a very brief sojourn into catering.
Oh, that's funny. So it sounds like that was a very short and not so sweet entrepreneurial venture. When was the one that was sort of, I always like to say the magic of one. Every artist, whether it's a musician, someone in film and television, you need that one hit to show the world that you've arrived. What was that one thing for you?
The one thing for me was actually a gradual process. It was a business that I started when my kids were small, and I was a single mother, and I just needed to feed them and keep a roof over our heads very badly, and had no particular ways of doing it. And my entrepreneurial ventures had tended to be a bit lobster-like, and brief. So I wasn't, should we say, highly equipped to take on the role, but needs must. And so I started selling because I had on and off got jobs in selling. So I had some selling experience. And I think that's always a great bit of experience for entrepreneurs to have that either down the market, on a phone, whatever, learn how to talk to people, learn how to sell. It's such a good grounding. But so I thought, well, I will sell things. I can sell on the phone while the kids are at play school, and I will buy in. I don't need much money to do that. I can buy on the tick and never and build up a client base. And I did. And I ended up with 2 factories.
Wow. 2 factories?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like something you kind of you skipped over. You did a whole Seinfeld yada yada yada. You went from starting coming to two factories.
It was over a period of time. I had fairly quickly. I had a tiny little farm building because that made sense. But and gradually there was 1 person, then 2 people to lift stuff and push it on couriers. But yeah, it was a leap. I'd started selling predominantly furniture. I'd tried a lot of other things, but furniture was what stuck, as you say, to one product. And selling furniture to order to interior designers. I was buying it, I suppose this is about 7 or 8 years in.
Mm-hmm.
I was buying it from one particular other tiny company. And I'll never forget it, because I was toddling along. We weren't doing fantastically well, but it was okay. And this guy knocked on my door on Friday afternoon, and I said, "Oh, hi, I didn't expect you. Come on in." And he said, "Well, I'm stopping." I went, "I'll stop and have a cup of tea." No, I'm stopping." "What, stopping what? What are you talking about?" "Well, I'm stopping my business. I can't supply you furniture next week."
Mm-hmm.
What? Exactly. Major panic, and all I could think about was, how am I going to feed the children? So I said, "Well, still come in and have a cup of tea." So we did, and he was in a terrible state. He'd got to burn out, as many of us do, and indeed I ended up in the end. But he really was, poor man. He was absolutely shot. And so I fed him copious amounts of tea that Friday afternoon, saying, okay, we'll look after you. We'll work this through. And we struck a deal whereby I would pay him on the never for that business. Which was literally a non-agreed, non-written down trust agreement.
Wow. And
I would take it over on a Monday morning. So there I was with 2 businesses to look after. And just practically, it didn't take long for the fact that, I had my warehouse in one place and this other business in another, and I was trying to do school runs and work at home, and so it became a unit in the middle, and that meant a factory building, and, it grew.
Wow.
Because I didn't judge it very well, because I didn't know what I was doing, so it had to grow.
That's awesome. It's funny. You mentioned something about the sales part of being an entrepreneur, and this is something, and this is one of the reasons why I cannot be an entrepreneur. And I think this is a difficulty that entrepreneurs sometimes have, is that as that role of being an entrepreneur, having your own business, your main job is to extract money from people's wallets. And for me, I feel uncomfortable with that transaction. Like for my day job now, producing and consulting podcasters, I don't want to know how much it costs. Like I tell people, like, I don't want to know how much you're paying me for this or anything like that. How much you're paying our company for this. I don't want to know. I'm remunerated by my company I have my salary, but I don't want to know how much you're paying, because to me, I have this deep down, just in my gut, I'm like, I don't want to take people's money from them. So, and I think entrepreneurs sometimes struggle with that too as well. And especially when it comes to the valuation of their company and the product that they're selling.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that makes you all much nicer people than I am, probably. It was something I didn't struggle with, I guess, because I'd come from that background of very hard sales from the jobs I'd sometimes had, where you were just chucked a list of people and phone numbers and told to sell something you'd never heard of. And that was what was going to pay for whatever I wanted that week or whatever when I was sort of 18, 19. So I was used to that approach partly, which helped. Then I had children, and I was so desperate I would have sold anything to anybody, and it sort of rolled from there. But yeah, I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, you're right, who do get it. And I think sales has this really bad image too, that it's so tied up in people's minds with bad ethics.
Yeah. And also it could hurt you in the long run, Jan, because you're so afraid to, for lack of a better word, overvalue your product. You're probably like, oh, okay, I'm making ends meet by selling my product or service for this, even though probably the market can dictate, or even there's just your community around you could dictate you could sell it for more, but you're afraid to make that jump. That's, I feel, a big part. And I know one of your expertise, part of your expertise is scaling. That's really a key part of scaling, right? When to raise your rates, when to raise prices for your products and services.
Yeah, very much so. And it's an interesting one because I had an experience of that, I guess, when would it have been the last sort of big recession. So I can't even think of the date about when it would have been the teens, but whichever one that was. I lose track of all these
Right.
recessions. Been through so many. But, we could all see it coming. And at the time, we were doing a lot of builder show homes with the furniture. That was a lovely business. It was tended to be repeat business. We knew our clients really well. And, they were medium demanding, but not ridiculous. And we were mid to high price, but not luxury. And we knew it. And it was a good fit. And the recession was coming. And I knew what was going to happen. That market was just going to go. And as you do, as indeed you were again talking about, on that wonderful podcast that I was listening to with Mark Randolph, and that mid-centre of the showroom market was just going to go altogether. So what do you do when that happens? You've got to change in some drastic way. And so we changed to luxury for the private market, no more commercial stuff. And jacked our prices right up because we had to. And I hated it. I absolutely hated everything about it. I didn't like the service we were giving. I didn't like the prices we were charging. I didn't like the clients. I didn't like the values. And it just was not a good fit at all for me. I kept the business going, but it wasn't right. So however much I may sell, there comes a moment when I do find it offensive, yeah.
And speaking of price and scaling, when I speak to entrepreneurs about this, I always was curious as to why many entrepreneurs, even though they were able to launch a successful company, had trouble with that scaling process. And from what I've learned, and maybe you can agree or disagree with this, is that many entrepreneurs are essentially subject matter experts. They're an expert of this one thing, to do this one thing. But once it comes to the business side of being an entrepreneur, they may not have that skill set, which is why you see a lot of companies, even in tech, the founder will usually, after 1 or 2 years, step away and find someone who's experienced as a CEO to take the company to the next level. So when you speak to entrepreneurs and you coach them and they're going through this process of scaling up where they're a subject matter expert, but they're not a business expert, how do you help them bridge that gap? Or does it become one of those things, like I mentioned, where they have to step back and bring someone in to take care of those duties?
I think the wise ones do that, be it with somebody they bring in to do the duties, or, they may have come to a point in scale where they need other founders involved, or at least a board or whatever. But, they have to look at themselves and think, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses here? And therefore, what does the company need? Because it's probably going to need more expertise from them, even if they've dabbled in business before. It's probably still going to need more expertise to scale it up. So they're going to need to bring that in. And I think, some of them recognize it, some of them don't. Some of them develop, some of them don't. You have to actually prioritize your own development as a person and your ability to develop. And as you say, they may be addicted to doing the developing or whatever, in which case, why not? If that's where they're happy, bring somebody else in to do it, but don't expect cake and eat it.
Do you run into entrepreneurs who lack the self-awareness that say, oh yeah, I built this company, I should be able to shepherd it into its next phase? Talk to me about the self-awareness piece for these entrepreneurs.
Very much so. I mean, in fairness, I was guilty of it too, Joe. Very, very much so. And for very well-meaning reasons. I didn't have time because I thought I ought to work all the hours for the company, whereas in fact, you're better off developing yourself. And I didn't want to spend money on me because I felt that was wrong and I ought to be putting it back in the company. It's just topsy-turvy way of looking at it. You have to stand right back and almost take yourself out of the equation and think completely what is best for this company, really. Not what if I wasn't here, what would be best for the company.
Yeah, I guess the ego piece plays a big part in this. And I always say, no matter what kind of human being you are, you could be the most philanthropic, you could be the kindest, you have to have an ego to succeed in whatever field you're going to be in. I always joke that if anyone in entertainment has to have an ego because they have to feel like, hey, I'm important enough that people want to watch me, listen to me, pay money to see me in these things. There has to be that. And entrepreneurs are the same way. You have to feel confident that, hey, this thing that I'm making is awesome and people should buy it. So if you have this built-in ego, and ego is not a bad thing. I'm just using it for shorthand. You have to switch it out for confidence, switch it out for being comfortable in your own skin, whatever may be. But that ego piece is really what drives the success for people, whether they're entrepreneurs or people who work in the arts or people who work in sales. You need to have a bit of an ego. And so I wonder, as you're speaking about the people, having the self-awareness to step away, how do you separate that ego part of it? Because you have to feel confident enough what you're doing that, hey, I could do that. I could do this.
Yeah, I think it depends really on the individual because it depends on their confidence levels. If they're confident and fairly secure by nature and they've got all the right support team in place, then they can probably get their heads around it. If they haven't got much support and they're very low in confidence, and or they have imposter syndrome, which so many people suffer from, and I'm sure it's the same in entertainment.
Absolutely.
It certainly was in the theatre, which was my mother's background. And any of those things can play into it and mess up people's thinking.
So I joked how difficult entrepreneurship is, but then there's the people like you who become serial entrepreneurs. And to me, I think I'll be able to understand entrepreneurship. The people that are serial entrepreneurs, I think you're just mental. I don't know why you do it to yourselves. And obviously you probably work with a lot of these serial entrepreneurs. What differentiates a serial entrepreneur that is really not just one of these people like, in sports, they call it stat accumulators. Like if you play baseball for 20 years, you're going to get 2,000 hits just because of the fact that you've played for so long. And so for serial entrepreneurship, if you're doing it long enough, you're going to have a few hits in there along the way. Or, for some people, maybe not, but more likely if you're doing it for a long period of time, you're going to rack up some hits. How does a serial entrepreneur judge success when there are so many irons in the fire?
I think that's a lovely question. I think you've got serial entrepreneurs who, a lot of the sensible ones, by my judgment, which has got nothing to do with anything, but by my judgment, have the sense to get out, to view it as a short-term thing, to build a company and then move on. Otherwise, you tend to end up getting stuck there for a very long period of time and not evolving, not having all the things you want and not necessarily better the company. So I think that's one of the reasons that people become serial entrepreneurs is they actually have the sense to chop and change. In addition to that, the sort of desire to start lots. It's like there's such a passion for building in an entrepreneur. They just want to create. You feed off it, don't you?
It's, also, Jan, speaking on that about entrepreneurs being able to do a lot of things. I know Bill Maher, the American comedian, once said, just because you're an entrepreneur and good at this one thing doesn't mean you can do anything else. And I think his example at the time was Howard Schultz, famously the founder and CEO of Starbucks, decided to run for president. And he said, hey, just because you can run and build a huge coffee empire that basically changed the way we look at coffee doesn't mean that you can be the president of the United States or should be the president of the United States. And then
Absolutely.
obviously he had that very, very short presidential run here in the States. So circling back to the idea of serial entrepreneurship, how do you know what subject matter you should delve with? You know, for the example, Howard Schultz is good at making and building a coffee company, but he's probably not going to be good at being a president. So with serial entrepreneurship, when you're dealing with many verticals, how do you decide what vertical you're involved with? Is it because you have some sense of expertise in that industry?
I honestly don't think so. No, I mean, it would have helped if I'd known anything about furniture, but I didn't. And the making side, which was the side I bought out in a tiny way initially. I mean, I certainly didn't know how to make a table, leave alone anything more complicated, or work a piece of machinery. So you can hire expertise onto your team. I think it's the idea, the understanding and ability to listen to what customers want, the idea and the ability to recognize an idea that's going to fly.
It's funny. So Jan, I recently moved to the southern part of the United States and built a home, and I've had for the first time in my life had extensive dealings with small businesses, a lot more than I ever had in my entire life. And for many years during my life, I would, when American Express did those small business Saturdays and any kind of, I would always try to help small business along the way with shops and stuff. And I used to wonder, like, man, I feel so bad for a lot of these small businesses that go out of business. They blame big box stores like the Walmarts of the world. But as I got to work with many a small business during this whole housing ordeal that I've had to deal with, I've realized that there's a reason they don't succeed. They're terrible at being a small business owner. And it's so funny. And it's not even because of the actual work they do, but the soft skills that I've discovered working with these small businesses are just terrible. Like, they're great at the actual job they do, but when it comes to customer service, when it comes to calling people back, when it comes to showing up when they're supposed to, why is small business, and I know this can go for big business as well, but we're talking small business as well. Why do a lot of small business owners have so much trouble with the soft skills of running a business? Because I feel like it's almost, as an outsider, it feels like, oh, I do a good job, the rest of the stuff should not matter. But it does matter, right?
Yes, yes, it does matter very, very much indeed. And I think one of the things is I think we're going through this huge transition stage of your sort of corner shop type local small business to entrepreneurship in full, being more available, more done by people, many more people. So and all those soft skills are an accepted, well, within reason, an accepted part of let's qualify that quickly,
Yeah.
of being an entrepreneur. And I don't think your traditional business, mum and dad store, whatever, was brought up with believing those were things they had to learn at all. I think, they just happened. And there's still that mentality with local business that we don't, I know it is where I live out in the country here. I'm permanently stunned by why small businesses don't think customers matter.
Yeah. It's crazy. To me, it's been one of the most frustrating parts of this ordeal of building this home and dealing with contractors and small businesses. And that's why I had to ask you that question, because to me, it doesn't make any sense. Like, there's more to your business than just actually doing the business. There's a lot of extra layers and nuance to it. And it's, even corporate America and big companies have learned that over the last 2 years during social unrest. It's more than just being a company. It's putting yourself out there and trying to make society a better place. And obviously that's a bigger picture than small businesses have to deal with. But in a way, they go hand in hand. That it's more than just making money being an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I mean, there's become this big movement about, for follow your passion. And that has become sort of, a crucial part of business, but combined with people wanting to save the planet, or at least do their bit towards saving the planet, and generally having a business that, gives back it's some and tackles the problems that society faces. 20 years ago, no business would have thought of that as being a part of their business remit, I don't think, or hardly anybody.
Yeah.
And yet we see them all the time now. It's become commonplace, and I've met fabulous entrepreneurs, as I'm sure have you, who actually created their business as a way of funding what they want to do to give back.
Yeah.
Which is a completely topsy-turvy way of doing it from 20 years ago.
And one of the things that's also changed over the last 20, 30 years, Jan, is introducing the word culture into the business acumen. And when I started, I started out in the radio business very, very young, but it was mid 90s, and the word of culture in the office was just not a thing that was ever uttered. And now you go into a bookstore, you can actually drown in the number of books written about company culture. So talk to me about the importance of company culture when we're dealing with these small business owners that you're used to writing for and coaching to scale their company. How important is it for that? Because we just joked about the fact that some of the soft skills are not so great when it comes to small business owners, but the culture piece, how do they treat their people from the inside?
It's very varied. I mean, there are a lot of them who still believe that if you get paid at the end of the week, then you should be grateful for a job.
Yeah.
And they are amazed that they can't get people to work for them. It's changed the job market so much. I mean, we're drastically short of people the world over. I think the UK is probably worse because of Brexit, but let's not go there. Yeah. We're all skills short on the one hand. Equally, for a lot of companies, we've got a global jobs market to call on. So, in actual fact, there's pluses as well. But people want to be treated decently, and that means culture.
I sometimes swap out that word of treating someone for decent is safe. People want to feel safe on their job. And I'm not talking about a forklift falling on your head. They want to feel like, hey, when I come into work, I don't have to pop some Alka-Seltzer because my stomach's upset the minute I walk into the office, or I have to worry about a boss mistreating me, or just maybe even worrying that any day you can be fired. It's that word, and I know sometimes that word gets overblown, like feeling safe. But when it comes to culture, I think that is the root of it. Like that's like the first part of company culture. You could do whatever you want. You could put all the ping pong tables and give all the free snacks you want. But if people don't feel safe there, all of that stuff is just window dressing.
I couldn't agree with you more. Somebody told me an absolutely astounding story for my next book, and he was saying that he knew this company that the head guy was a lovely guy, not in work, but at work he would turn into this screaming heebie-jeebie sort of monster. And, he would scream at people so it could be heard down the street, and everybody lived in fear. And of course that permeates down. So his senior staff, senior management were both afraid on one hand and totally toxic and screaming on the other. And they were all on antidepressants and you name it.
Jeez.
And there's a well-known story that apparently one of the sort of middle management used to take a gun to work to protect themselves.
Jeez. Wow.
I know.
Jeez.
So that's extreme toxicity for you.
Yeah, I wasn't even going into the area of having to bring a gun to work, but I guess there's extremes from both sides. You mentioned you're writing that new book, but let's talk about one of your previous books, which was Scale for Success. And I know the idea of it is to help entrepreneurs build their businesses to leap from 1 million to 10 million. And again, like Jan, you like to yada yada, 1 to 10 million. That seems like a big jump. How does the book help people do that?
Well, I think, that book was written very much in mind with my own experiences, because I find that leap impossible, really. I didn't get past the 10 and got stuck fairly early on in the sort of multis. But, I think it's the real morphing of business, if you can have a morph of a business. But, but it's such a complete change from a tiny startup to creating an enterprise, and that it requires massive changes in all sorts of ways. And people don't necessarily know that. We hear of startups crashing and going out of business all the time, but less is talked about people getting into terrible trouble at that stage. And I found that an awful lot of people I knew were all getting stuck at that stage. And so I became slightly obsessive about it and wanted to find out what the stumbling blocks were, and spoke to a lot of people, some of which are in the book, to investigate that. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of them is we drift. We continue to think everything's going fine and really well. So, we've got to the 1 million or 1,000,005 or whatever. And, so we just do a bit more. And it's not remotely a case of doing a bit more. Nothing's the same. You're going to need a totally different staffing structure to grow right up. You're going to need different funding. You're going to need different systems. You're talking radical change. And particularly existing businesses who didn't plan to scale but just think it's a nice way of getting some more money get a really nasty shock. So that was the thinking behind it.
Awesome. The name of the book is Scale for Success. Her name is Jan Cavelle. Jan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're very welcome. And that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.